Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar hosted jointly by the UK Department for International Trade, the British Embassy in Riyadh, and AEI Saudi, also based here in Riyadh. We're just waiting for a few more attendees to join, and then we'll get cracking through the slide pack. Not a huge amount of slides to go through, but hopefully the commentary will be extremely informative for you all. The slide deck itself will be distributed after the webinar, and you'll have an opportunity to ask questions throughout the session. And we actually have 15 minutes allocated at the end of the presentations to go through a Q&A session. And if we don't get through your questions, or if you have questions that pop to your mind at some point later on, please feel free to contact us. The contact details are on the final slide. I'm joined today, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Stuart D'Souza. I'm the co-founder and CEO of AEI Saudi. We're a Saudi company appointed as the partner to the Department for International Trade to provide advice and guidance to British exporters looking to enter the Saudi market. I have Atouk with me as well, who's the healthcare trade advisor based here at the embassy in Riyadh, and she's joined by Hala Al-Hajj, who's the life sciences trade advisor, also based in Riyadh. And then on the line from Jeddah, we have Ayman Abedi, who's also a trade advisor for the life sciences sector. And then towards the end of the presentation, Ryan Sanderson will join us from Informa to discuss and to give you an overview of the Global Health Exhibition, which Informa are organising in the next few months. So just to remind everybody, on the right-hand side of your screen, you should be able to see a drop-down menu where you can ask questions. So please feel free to submit written questions there. As I said, we'll answer them at the end of the session. So just to start very briefly, a quick overview of AEI. I've just got 3 slides, and my role is very much just to give you a broad overview of what's going on in Saudi Arabia currently with regards to Vision 2030, and also to, I suppose, give some insight into some of the pitfalls and challenges of doing business in the kingdom. Our consulting practice has been established for 6 years, and in that time we've helped 750 foreign companies enter the Saudi market. Those are mainly British companies, but also we're a partner to various states in North America. And although there's no process to follow for business success in Kingdom, having been through it 750 times, we can certainly provide a great deal of valid commercial advice and guidance. We also provide support services and manpower services. So when foreign companies actually start delivering their projects, or delivering their goods to the kingdom, we're on hand to provide what we call life support, which could be accommodation, office space, phones, transport services, procurement services, as well as manpower services across the kingdom. So this is by far the question I'm asked most often is Vision 2030 real? For those of you that are not familiar with Vision 2030, this is the reform program, which is something of an understatement, but it's a revolutionary reform program that has been published by the Saudi government and is forming the basis of government policy going forward to transform the way that the kingdom is operated, how it's regulated, how it derives its revenue, its labour market, its healthcare market. Every sector and segment of the government is being impacted by Vision 2030. It was published in mid-2016, so we're about 2 years into Vision 2030. And is it real? Well, the answer is very simply yes. We're already seeing the dramatic transformation of the kingdom. I've always been a great believer that Saudi Arabia is actually changing faster than any country in the world, really. And certainly in the last 2 years, that's absolutely the case. And I was talking to somebody the other day about where else in the world is there such an opportunity for transformation like we've seen in Saudi Arabia. Perhaps the only time before has been following the fall of the Soviet Union and those former Eastern European countries emerging into a different way of doing business, a different way of conducting their affairs. What has driven Vision 2030? Well, of course, there is the substantial personality of the Crown Prince, Prince Mohammed bin Salman. He is the main proponent of Vision 2030, but he's obviously bringing a considerable amount of the government and the population along with him. What has driven the desire and indeed the need, the realization, if you like, of the need for Vision 2030 is around three things really, or around two things actually. Saudization, which is the Saudi government term for the creation of jobs for Saudi nationals. 70% of the population here is under the age of 30. Unemployment is a problem, and creating jobs for those 22 million Saudis is now a real priority. It has always been a priority, but there's never, in years gone by, there's never not necessarily been the focus in terms of monitoring compliance with Saudization regulations and that sort of thing. So Saudization, the creating of jobs for Saudis, is a big part of Vision 2030. The other element of it is diversification of the economy and diversifying the government's sources of revenue away from purely being from oil sales. And we've seen various tax raising measures introduced, levies, as well as changes to regulations to allow a greater amount of economic activity to take place here in the kingdom. The principal vehicle which will deliver Vision 2030 is something called the Public Investment Fund. And this is a bit like a sovereign wealth fund, not entirely, it doesn't meet the definition entirely, but certainly the aspirations are that the Public Investment Fund will be the main conduit for investments made by the Saudi government around the world, but also the main conduit for delivering Vision 2030 in the kingdom. So beyond actually creating jobs and diversifying revenue, it's also having a huge cultural impact. Any of you that have visited Saudi in the last 2 years will have noticed the difference. I've been here for 13 years, and I can tell you there's been a massive change in that time, but particularly in the last 2 years. And you can see some of the pictures there. The Riyadh Marathon on the left-hand side that was in February this year. The General Sport Authority were expecting about 5,000 people to register. 27,000 people registered for that marathon. And again, you might say, well, how many people actually turned up? Well, 15,000 people turned up to run the race. Obviously, there have been other high-profile events, the reintroduction of cinemas, of concerts. We even had Comic-Con in Jeddah recently. And the photo on the right-hand side there, that's actually Tatlia Street, which is one of the main streets in Riyadh, on National Day. For those of us that were there, it was like a rave, basically. They had DJs and lasers and everyone dancing and having a great time. It was quite an extraordinary evening. Of course, I suppose one of the most significant impacts has been for women, with women driving, but also the relaxing of regulations around the free movement of women and so on. And the impact of that, we will obviously see a lot of positives in the short term, but really the reintroduction of women into the workforce in Saudi is going to have a considerable impact for many, many years to come. I'll just say one last thing, which is about the broader economic outlook. Things are positive in Saudi, but of course challenges remain. And for those of you looking at doing business here or expanding on your business in the kingdom, I cannot stress enough the importance of seeking informed and independent advice. It's so important to pick up the phone to your trade advisor, to the British Embassy team, to the various trade bodies in the UK who can give you that informed and independent advice about the challenges that everyone faces in Saudi Arabia. As I said at the start, we've been quite successful with about 750 mainly British companies exporting to the kingdom. And these, the 4 Ps, the 5 Ps are applicable to all markets. But what we have found is that sometimes people seem to leave their business acumen behind when they arrive in Saudi Arabia, and are often bowled over, if you like, by the first Saudi that they meet, or the first partner who promises everything but often delivers very little. So we always talk about the importance of planning. Planning is certainly extremely important. This is about getting independent advice about how to operate in Saudi, understanding tax implications, understanding visas, and that sort of thing. But it's also about setting the right expectations with your corporate leadership, that you're not just going to fly over to Saudi and sign up a mega deal in a weekend. It takes corporate patience and corporate stamina. By far the 2 most important things on this slide are the partner and payment. If you need, one of the other questions we get asked all the time is, do I need a partner? And the answer to that question is sometimes yes and sometimes no. It depends very much on what you're doing and how you're operating, what you're exporting. In the healthcare sector, if you need Food and Drug Authority registrations, then yes, you may well need a partner. If you're looking at onward distribution networks, warehousing requirements, then yes, you might need a partner. If you're providing consultancy or training, you may need some sort of support on the ground, but you may not need an agent or a distributor. And of course, the critical thing about the partner is understanding where they sit in the supply chain. Either in the supply chain or between you and your client. And the most important thing is payment. Payment in Saudi Arabia remains a challenge. And so particularly for smaller, medium-sized businesses, you need to be aware from a cash flow planning perspective that you may be waiting 3 to 6 months to be paid, even if you have a 30-day payment term in your contract. It's very rare that the Saudis do not pay. It's just that payment can take some time. We're hoping that that is going to change fairly soon. The introduction of something called Etimad, which is an online payment system very similar to what they have in the UAE, and notwithstanding the challenges that you still have with payment in the UAE, we're hoping it's going to make payments here a bit smoother, a bit more efficient, a bit more predictable. So as I said, I suppose if there's one takeaway from my 3 slides, it's please do get in touch with the embassy team who are here to provide you with independent and informed advice about how to do business in Saudi Arabia. So with that, I shall hand over to Aya.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining this webinar today. I'm very pleased to be here today with the organizing of AEI to this webinar. So just a quick introduction. I lead on the healthcare sector at the Department for International Trade, along with my colleagues Hala Hash Hussein and Ayman Abaidi, who will be speaking to you later in this webinar today. And we work together at the Department for International Trade to engage with UK expertise, along with the Vision 2030 to see how they can do business in Saudi Arabia. I'm going to start by this slide. It's why to invest in KSA. So Saudi Arabia has the largest healthcare sector in the GCC, and it accounts for 48% of total government spending on healthcare in the region. After education, the largest budget allocation in the country goes to the healthcare sector. And since 2010, 13% of the national budget has been allocated for healthcare. And this is because of its sheer population, which is rapidly and increasing pressure on existing services at one point. And we're all aware that the Saudi market has always been reliant on foreign goods and services. It is the largest market for medical equipment and healthcare life science products in the Gulf. As you can see, in the recent years, many steps have been taken by the government to further open the market for foreign expertise, especially the UK, as KSA is the key UK partner on regional issue and is becoming increasingly activist in its foreign policy, especially the NTP 2020. So one of the major targets in the vision, as you can see, is to increase the foreign direct investment from 3.8 to the international level of 5.7% of GDP. As you can see in this slide, the most important players in Saudi Arabia is the government. So the Ministry of Health and SFDA, this is the most important bodies, which one of them is the Ministry of Health, is responsible for all of the health regulator bodies, and the SFDA, they both responsible for overall administration of the healthcare industry in the kingdom. And we have the Council of Cooperative Health Insurance oversees the insurance market. In 2015, the kingdom enacted the Private Health Institution Regulation, as the SFDA oversees and approves the importation of all medical devices, pharmaceuticals, biologics, food, and drinks. And the Ministry of Health oversees healthcare services providers and currently owns most of the hospitals in the kingdom. We can say like 60% of these hospitals. The Saudi Arabian General Investment Authority, which is called SAGIA, governs foreign indirect investments and provides license to investors. Speaking of SAGIA, like my colleague Stuart actually mentioned, SAGIA is really helping a lot in the payment issues that many companies is having, and they are really pushing for investment in KSA. So the MOH is working with SAGIA to coordinate a strategy to create an effective regulatory system and cultivate a favorable atmosphere to attract private health providers and investors from abroad. This is also one of the key outcomes that the Vision 2030 is seeking to achieve, definitely, especially after the Crown Princess visit, which happened last March. So here are some statistics that shows that the KSA, Healthcare and Life Science market, is the largest in the MENA and has significant infrastructure. As you can see, healthcare professionals from physicians and allied health personnel, nurses, the number of hospital beds, clinics, and hospitals as well. So UK focus so far in KSA is on supporting the KSA ambitions in many different entities so far, and looking to expand further. Either it was on the digital health, I can say about education and training, and other PPP projects. And if we want to rank them from the most important opportunities, I would say digital health comes first, and then other PPP projects, and then education and training. So going forward, we can see that the health sector and life science demand will increase significantly as the drivers of the health sector demand from whether it was the growing population, which will increase 28% till the year of 2030, and the aging population that will increase by 201% for the population which is above 50 years of age, and that will lead to an increased demand in several areas. One of the themes is the long-term and extended care services, and there will be a rising prevalence of chronic condition, which is due, of course, to the increased percentage in obesity, which is very common here in Saudi Arabia, and it will increase by 60% till the year of 2030, as 1 in 3 adults and 1 in 4 children. So this is a huge number. So the fact is the current healthcare system is highly dependent on government providers and as well imports. We can see the percentage of the hospital beds, which are 60%, belongs to the ministry, and the clinics, which approximately half of them belongs to the Ministry of Health as well. But in the new healthcare strategy, the private sector will have definitely a big role. And this is where most of the companies will be interested in. As in parallel with the planned upcoming privatization strategy and implementation, the ministry will set to introduce a health sector reform in the governance of its hospitals and clinics, as it transforms itself into a regulator rather than an operator. So I'm gonna just stop here to speak more about the VRO. Everyone comes to KSA and planning to work with the Ministry of Health or the SFDA has to listen about a body called the VRO, which is called the Vision Realization Office. It's an office within the ministry with a mandate to lead the healthcare reform in Saudi Arabia by designing, operating, and monitoring the initiatives defined as part of the National Transformation Plan. So VRO is focused on managing the healthcare sector transformation through 6 transformational themes. You can see them in this slide. So they are the corporatization, model of care, private sector, healthcare financing, workforce, and digital e-health, which we spoken about earlier. So I'm going to have a quick round about each one of them, just to let you know what kind of focus UK companies mostly focus about. So digital health, which is the most important part, as the minister has a IT background and is looking very much to expand into a lot of opportunities in this area. So they are providing digital tools, solution for patient safety, prevention, most importantly, unified patient records, and workforce efficiency with a focus on telemedicine, as well coupled with crowded software. The model of care theme, it's the theme that focuses on prevention and out-of-hospital care models, which is more related to the know-how. The insurance-based finance for any insurance company. The MOI is currently working on a new financing model, starting with the transfer the employees, Saudi national, to a health insurance model, like the current private sector insurance. The governance, which will focus on separate regulatory and delivery function by creating independent provider network. The human capital, this is for all of the education and training companies. They will focus on enhancing the quality and the quantity of the workforce through increased capacity and licensing and making the profession actually more attractive. On the PSP part, this is the most important part for which most of the opportunity arises from. This theme has 9 initiatives. There are 3 clusters. The first clusters include long-term home care and rehabilitation. A second one includes radiology labs and primary care. And we have hospital commissioning, new medical city in the third cluster. So each initiative of these, this is what's actually most important, is launching many opportunities, and each initiative is in a different level of opportunities, whether it was for consultants or a clinical services provider, digital health, facility management, many opportunities are arising from there. And I will be sharing with you a work frame for these 9 initiatives that are detailed for each of these, one of them, and describes more detail for each. So for sure, there is no simple formula for success in Saudi Arabia. Otherwise, everyone would copy the successful model. The market is open, and so much depends on the range selected, pricing efficiency, possibly most of all, and the relationship potential between the personnel involved. This is for sure. But anyway, I'll be more than happy to be in contact with any healthcare providers that is looking to expand their services internationally. And we will be sharing along with the presentation, as I said, the work form that will describe these details in much details. Thank you so much for your time. I will introduce my colleague Ayman, who leads on the life science sector, and he will be able to give you more brief on these opportunities as well.
Thank you, Aya. So just a little background about what we do here in Jeddah. Aya and Hala, of course, my colleagues in Riyadh, cover the government side of Saudi Arabia, which is, of course, the Riyadh being the hub of all government ministries. Jeddah has always been the trade hub of Saudi Arabia. Hence, you'll find all the big healthcare private sector projects in this part of Saudi Arabia, and also the big investors in terms of the private sector, families and sheikhs are all based here in Jeddah. So it's always been the trade hub of Saudi Arabia, and there is now some sort of a shift where the government is trying to reach out to the private sector, which is mostly based here in Jeddah, to identify opportunities where they can work or collaborate together in terms of healthcare or education. And we're seeing a lot of the involvement by these big groups now in terms of government projects, the existing projects that that have maybe were not funded by the government for whatever reasons. Now they're handing over these projects to the private sector. So we're seeing a lot of movement now in this part of Saudi Arabia, which is very encouraging, especially in terms of the capital that these private investors have to help with the economy, especially at these challenging times. So the first thing that we wanted to discuss, which is the first slide, is the National Transformation Program, which is sort of Vision 2020. It's in a way the government's way of trying to identify if they're going in the right direction before hitting Vision 2030. And if you look at the figures, I mean, we'll see that the government is trying to, achieve figures that are almost the same figures that they're trying to achieve with Vision 2030. Realistically, these figures may not be reached by 2020, but the closer it is to these figures, the more it will tell the government that we're on the right track to achieving Vision 2030. Now, one of the points we will see on the slide is the Saudi citizens who are unified digital medical, who are whether under the unified digital medical record, and will show at the moment it's under 0, which is actually it's not 0. But the Saudi citizen has access to public health services, so they tend to go to the public sector for their medical needs rather than to the private sector. So there isn't at the time a way of recording or merging the records between the public sector and the private sector, and hence they've put it at 0, not because the figures aren't there or it's actually at 0, but because there is no system to record this within the private or the public sector. And this is where I mentioned that the need for digital health to opportunities, because of all of these now need to be digitalized, and there is a need. The country is lacking these services, and there is really a need for foreign companies within digital health to come in and fill the gap. So maybe next slide. So this talks about the number of projects that are expected in Saudi Arabia. Now, some of these projects are already on the ground. King Abdullah bin Abdulaziz Medical Complex in Jeddah and Riyadh, of course. The one in Jeddah is already active, and we're actually looking at phase 2 of expansion. Now, just to be very, very clear, most of these projects have been handed over to the public sector. So a lot of the big private sector groups have been asked to take over some of the management of these projects, because the government management of these projects was the reason why these projects have taken longer than expected to complete for them to complete these projects. So for King Abdullah, for example, King Abdullah Medical Complex is very strongly affiliated with the Faqih group, where they are adding some of their already services on the ground within their projects in Jeddah, their projects in Riyadh, and some of their projects even in Dubai. So the government itself has identified that 48 billion will not directly need to come from the government, but it can be funds that can be joint public and private sector funds. And the big groups have been tasked to take over these projects and identify how much they can pump into these projects to make them, first of all, for the same reason that we've discussed, that the Ministry of Health are not looking to be operators anymore, but just regulators. And with the existence of the private sector in Saudi Arabia and how big and strong it is, it's a very good step for them to start taking over these projects and bring in their expertise and bring in their manpower, and even the strong partnership they've had for example, with Sulaiman Al Habib Hospital in Riyadh, where they've had a very strong affiliation with Circle for years. They can then bring these services into some of these projects rather than, using the regular in-house companies that have been going on for years and years and have never really delivered the services that would bring these hospitals into what you would call a modern run facility that can cope with the demands of either the Saudi citizen or even the expatriate who's paying a lot of money in terms of either they're paying directly or paying through insurance. Looking at the next slide, please. So we're talking about the pharmaceutical market in Saudi Arabia. The pharmaceutical market has actually been very big in Saudi Arabia. Companies like GSK have been in Saudi Arabia since 1952. The difference now is, of course, GSK are looking to invest directly rather than having a partner in Saudi Arabia, which is something that my colleague Stuart mentioned, that you can now start looking at Saudi Arabia as a means of investing rather than a partnership. So with GSK, with AstraZeneca, they're all really looking into investing their own money into projects in Saudi Arabia, into opening their own facilities. And these facilities will end up then being the hub for the whole region rather than just Saudi Arabia. So if you look at King Abdullah Economic City, their module is that by 2020, King Abdullah Economic City is going to be the pharmaceutical hub for the Middle East. So that's where we see these growth. If you look at the first point, it says $3.5 billion by 2012. It is actually now nearing $4.2 billion US dollars because of all of these projects and all of that that need to bring this. It's a strong market. It's a big market, and there are a lot of opportunities for these products to be manufactured in Saudi Arabia. So by 2030, they're expecting it to be 5.6 billion. It is at 4.2 billion right now. Now, will it be 5.6 billion by 2030? Probably be even more. There have been some challenges, of course, in terms of the Saudization and a lot of companies who are already manufacturing in Saudi Arabia, Saudi local companies, are reluctant to take on new products, of course, because of the manpower. I mean, the huge percentage of expats have left the country. Will there be a need for these? The purchasing power has decreased. So there is a bit of a slowdown at the moment because of all of these changes. But it's not. I don't think in my thinking that this is going to affect the 5.6 billion figure that Saudis expecting by 2030, because there's a lot of appetite by foreign investors to come and invest in Saudi Arabia, especially in the pharmaceutical market. SAGIA, as Aya mentioned, are very involved at the moment in regulating some of the licenses and even some of the obstacles that used to be there before in terms of registering new companies, international companies, medical devices, pharmaceuticals used to take a long time to register. Now, with the help of SAGIA, with the help of SFDA, it's slow. Changing is happening, but it's quite slow. So if we look at point 3, it says 147 patents have been issued or registered. It doesn't say the dates, but this we know since 2016. Now, this could be a bit misleading because 147 were actually patents that have had to re-register under the new SFDA regulation. I mean, these some of them were there in Saudi, been in Saudi for the last 20, 30 years, but they had to re-register, so that was included in the figure. So it may be a bit misleading, but it is still a big number in compared to the rest of the MENA region. We know that the investment is big. It's 18.5 billion in healthcare. Regulation is changing. We have bodies like SFDA. We have SAGIA. They're helping to try and achieve these figures. They've helped with companies like GE. They've helped with companies like Bupa. So we are optimistic about these changes, and we're optimistic about these figures. Next slide, please. So we go back again, we talk about the National Transformation Program. And part of the National Transformation Program in terms of pharmaceuticals is they want to increase the domestic market production from just 18%, which is what it is now, to 40%. It is doable because we know that 18% does not include the new plant that AstraZeneca just signed recently. It does not include GSK's new facility, as well as the new facility that they plan in Cake. So if we look at and of course Unilever and Pfizer, which are really big facilities that have already opened up in Cake and producing huge amounts of pharmaceuticals. So in our expectations, it's more than doable because of the attractiveness of the market, and because of where cake lies, especially with the new King Abdullah port, which is part of cake, and what it will mean for the region, especially for North Africa, which of course was at the time, to this day still most of it comes from Jabal Umar. It's Jabal Ali in Emirates. So with all of these changes, with the port and the capacity that the port can accommodate, these figures are almost, doable now because of all these new plants that are opened up almost every year, and the appetite, like we've mentioned, with the UK pharmaceutical or even the global pharmaceutical companies. 27 pharmaceutical manufacturers. It's actually at 32 at the moment. But because of the changes, because of the VAT introduction, because of the new Saudization law, not a lot of these factories who are manufacturing in Saudi Arabia are adding any to their portfolio because they don't understand the new figures. The population is decreasing because of the amount of expats leaving the country, so no one is looking at adding more to the production line until until things steady down. They understand Saudization. Of course, Saudization is also going to involve the sales and marketing of pharmaceutical products now, which of course it's been dominated by expats for the last 30, 40 years. So these changes have put a hold to these 32 pharmaceutical plants that are actually working on the ground at the moment. But if these things didn't exist, 80% of manufacturing of pharmaceutical products in-house would have been an easy thing to achieve. The projected expected growth of 10%. Again, this was something that was announced and projected in 2015. With the changes that are happening now, it's gone down from 10% to just 4%. In the last 2 years, because of course a lot of expats, as we mentioned, are leaving. There's a VAT introduction. Fuel prices have gone up. So all of these have changed the projected expected growth that was announced in 2015. We are now at 2018, and the last figure that we have received was just 4%. Next slide, please. So we talk about success stories. We've just mentioned two here, which is the Mom Pharma company, which is part of the Saudi pharmaceutical industry, which is SPI, which will, of course, supporting $4.4 million loan to increase the capacity of the plant. So we talk again about the expected growth in pharmaceutical manufacturing in Saudi Arabia. It is there, it is expected, but again, with the need of manpower, and it's become sort of a luxury now to have enough capacity of manpower to run these facilities. Will they be able to achieve their targets? It is yet to be seen, but the appetite is there. On the other hand, GSK are investing big time. AstraZeneca are investing big time. Reckitt Benckiser are investing big time. So there's a lot of need for these pharmaceuticals to invest in. Okay. So the next slide, please. So yes. So sorry if I've gone over my expected time. Just a quick discussion about this. So we've talked about the need for the medical devices. There's an appetite for the pharmaceutical products in Saudi. So the market is, and the opportunities are there, and for the private sector. Next slide, please. So these are the investment opportunities were identified in this slide. I think it's self-explanatory, and I will hand you now to Ryan Sanderson to talk about Global Health Exhibition, and I do apologize for going over my time. Thank you.
Hi, a very good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for being here with us. And yeah, thank you very much, Ayman and Stuart. And I know those were fantastic presentations and certainly very interesting and useful. A bit of background quickly on Informa. We are officially now the largest exhibition organizer in the medical space in the world. We've recently just finalized our acquisition of UBM. UBM obviously has some incredible brands such as Hospital R, CPHI, etc. So those fit very, very well into our life sciences division. Another big exciting development from our perspective is what's happening in Saudi. You've seen a lot of fascinating information today, and we certainly as a business have been investing very heavily in this market. We historically have run an event called Saudi Health. We ran that, we've run it 3 times. You guys touched a little bit earlier about the need to work with a partner. We had a partner in Saudi. That contract expired after 3 years, and the partner chose not to run it or not to renew it with us. So we have got an awful lot of experience in exhibitions in this market, and we do understand some of the complexities and some of the challenges there. The Saudi Health event was run last year, but it wasn't run by Informa. We met with the Minister of Health during Arab Health this year, and basically they mandated us to run the exhibition that we now call Global Health Exhibition. It's running in September. Technically, it is a launch event. It's the inaugural event, but as I say, it really is just a continuation of what we've done over the 3 years with Saudi Health. It's running 10th until the 12th of September. It's in Riyadh. The kind of 4 key areas that we really are focusing on as per the instructions of the government and to align with the plans for Vision 2030. We're focusing very heavily on the technology sector. We're focusing very heavily on hospitals. There's a big push to privatize some of the big, the big hospital cities from the government. So we're focusing on a lot of the key international hospital brands. We're working in the laboratory space pretty heavily. So I guess those are the 3 real key areas that we're looking to push. Naturally, it is there are a lot of medical device manufacturers that are exhibiting with us as well. With everything that Informa do, we're always education led. So there are there's a really exciting and a very, very we're very excited to share the conference program with the audience at large and with you guys. So I'd encourage you maybe after this presentation, it might be worthwhile to go and have a look on the Global Health Exhibition website, where we're starting to publish details about some of the conferences. There will be more information coming soon just about CPD accreditation, and it's really, really exciting indeed. Could you move to the next slide, please? Next slide if possible. Great, thank you very much. Sorry, one back. Sorry about this. It's a bit frustrating sometimes not having control, but so here's just a bit more information about the Congress and what the key topics and areas are. There is an awful lot going on in the market, and we're very, very, very excited to share this event with you. It might be more beneficial for everyone just if there are any specific questions, maybe just direct them to me afterwards. I do believe we have a question and answer session following this. I'd be more than happy to discuss any elements of the event with you individually in a bit more detail. We're definitely looking forward to welcoming a lot of British companies. The market is officially open in Saudi, and we're very proud and very happy to be the market maker there in this particular space. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Ryan. That was very interesting, and thanks to all the speakers today. There will be copies of the slides being issued, and the webinar was also recorded and then will be uploaded to a YouTube channel, and a link will be sent out with the slides as well. We have some questions that have been submitted, so I'll just go through those now. But obviously, if you have other questions, please feel free to just submit them now, or we'll address them directly with you on a one-to-one basis. There's a question from David Watson about specialist healthcare advertising agencies and opportunities to help promote and educate patients and healthcare professionals. David, I think if we address that one directly with you offline, it's obviously quite a specific area. In broad terms, yes, there are opportunities, absolutely. But there are various campaigns being led by actually not only the Ministry of Health, but also other government agencies such as the General Sport Authority, aimed at various healthcare issues in the kingdom, from diabetes and obesity-related matters to general, broader campaigns for mass participation in sport and getting active. And of course, there's also the opportunities arising from more Saudi market-focused advertising, looking at the Saudi consumer base for the pharmaceutical companies that are setting up here, who are looking for in-market expertise and advice, targeting specifically the Saudi consumer for their drugs and medications. Karen has kindly given us two questions, one about reimbursement for diagnostics. Again, Karen, I think if we could take that one offline and talk to you about that directly, but you have a broader question about getting visas for the event in September. The best way to address that is initially, if you're coming for that specific event, to get in touch with Informa and they can take you through the visa process. For female applicants, it is slightly more difficult, and I would advise you to allow at least 4 weeks to begin that process and to get that process complete to enable you to get the necessary entry visa to come into the kingdom. Another question there from Caroline. We are a small and medium-sized business wanting to sell in the kingdom. We have a number of questions regarding SFDA regulations and SASO. Caroline, we'll contact you directly about that. But in broad terms, the SFDA, the Saudi Food and Drug Authority, does have a prescribed process, rather, in terms of how to register products. It's one of the things we always tell our clients is that nothing is black and white in Saudi Arabia, and often one person's experience can be very different to another, and consistency in terms of advice and guidance and outcomes remains an issue. We have been successful in advising many clients of getting through the SFDA process, and it's very much about being ready in terms of your documentation, labeling, whatever it may be, before hitting the sort of submit button. So you have as few interactions or back and forth with SFDA as possible. And SASO is, again, in applicable cases, a very similar experience. There can be inconsistent application of the rules, but again, broadly speaking, there is a process to be followed. SASO is the Saudi Arabian Standards Organization, which generally governs the import of products that will be made available for public sale. And again, there is a regime of inspections and monitoring and certifications that will be required for that. So Caroline, we'll contact you directly, but for everybody else, this comes back to planning in terms of how you access the Saudi market, making sure you're aware of the rules and regulations that are applicable to your particular product or service, which in the healthcare sector will probably either arise from the SFDA or from SASO. The next question from David Baghurst: do you have an update on plans to establish a National Institute of Health, similar to the National Institute for Health Research in the UK, a funding body which would coordinate investment in health and life sciences from a research and development perspective? I'm afraid we don't have any information on that, David, at the moment. Perhaps I'll ask Aya to get in touch with you directly. We're not aware of that as an initiative that's currently been funded in this year anyway, as far as the Ministry of Health is concerned. Other questions. Are there opportunities to further look into imaging healthcare software within radiology departments? From Harry. Well, obviously it's a very specific question. I'll talk about it in broad terms in terms of the radiology sector. In fact, I'll ask Aya to comment on that.
Yes, hi Harry, how are you? So I'll speak with you separately, but is this related to the tender of, if it was related to the tender of Imagine Healthcare software, they actually extended it, and I could share with you later details on that. And there are a lot of actually Imagine Healthcare software opportunities. And we just received a tender for a clinical coding software, if you're interested as well. Hope this helps, and I will contact you later.
Great.
Back to you.
Thank you, Aya. Thank you very much. So a question about, from Adrian, a very important question about due diligence and background checks on potential distributors. This is an issue. So in terms of being able to conduct due diligence in Saudi Arabia is quite challenging. There's obviously not the same regulatory environment for companies here as there is in the UK in terms of information disclosure and accessibility to information about ownership and track record to enable a third party to make a judgment as to the soundness or trustworthiness or credibility of a particular distributor over another. What we can do is, as the team based here in Saudi, we can undertake certain activities in terms of visiting potential distributors, asking for documents, making sure you are asking the right sorts of questions of your distributor, to check the activities on their commercial registration, to ask them if they're representing other clients, to check with the Ministry of Commerce about other exclusive arrangements that they may have registered before. So we can't undertake a sort of formal due diligence that some companies offer in other markets, but we can certainly help with a broad background of a potential distributor. And of course, the embassy team have a very sound understanding of the whole of the market landscape in terms of giving you options in terms of distributors, making sure that you're not just signing up with the first Saudi that you happen to meet, but you've got a number of options to consider. There's another very specific question here from Janet about some information about liver radiology in KSA and MRI devices.
Okay, it is a specific question, and we just recently sent a delegation from 6 Ministry of Health delegates who went to UK and have visited several NHS trusts and companies to understand more about the radiology services. But anyway, I will contact with you because tenders will be coming out, I think, after 2 months. We'll give it after Eid, and then we will contact with you directly, Janet, if you're interested about this specific area.
Great, thanks, Aya. I think we're nearly done now, so we're coming up to the hour point. As I said, we'll be distributing the slide pack and giving you a link to a recording of the webinar to everyone that's registered. If you've got colleagues who registered but were unable to attend, they'll obviously also receive the slides and the recording. And we'll make sure that in the email you have points of contact with Aya, Hala, and Ayman to be able to submit further questions and to either develop your business in the kingdom or to even look at Saudi as a first export market. And obviously the email will also include Ryan's details to discuss and book your stand at the exhibition. So without further ado, thank you very much, everybody. I hope you found it useful and informative, and we look forward to seeing you in Saudi soon. Thank you.